Today, we're tackling a huge topic, one that shapes our lives every single day, whether we realize it or not: government. We're going to look at where the idea even came from, all the different shapes it can take, and, what it actually does in the real world. All right, let's dive right in. So let's kick things off with the most basic question of all. Why do we even have governments? I like to think of it this way. If a society is a computer, then the government is its operating system. It's that complex code running in the background that's supposed to keep the whole thing from crashing. But what is that code really meant to do? Well, when you boil it all down, a government is just the system a community agrees on to organize itself. Its main job, its whole purpose, is to create some order and security, to lay down the rules of the road so that society doesn't just descend into total chaos. It's the foundation that lets people live and work together. But this idea, this concept of a formal government, it didn't just pop into existence. Oh no, it's actually the result of thousands of years of human thought, a ton of debate, and a whole lot of trial and error. The roots of this idea go way, way back. In ancient Greece, you had philosophers like Plato and Aristotle kicking around the idea that government's true purpose was to create justice and help people live a good life. Now, let's fast forward a couple thousand years to the Enlightenment. This is where thinkers like John Locke introduced something truly revolutionary: the social contract. This was a game changer. The idea is that a government's power doesn't come from a divine right, but from an agreement, a contract, with the very people it governs. And for that social contract to actually work, it has to be built on a few really solid pillars. First, you need legitimacy. People have to believe the government even has the right to rule. It also has to follow the rule of law, meaning everybody, even the leaders, plays by the same rules. Then, of course, there's representation, making sure the people's voices are actually heard. And finally, accountability, the idea that those in power have to answer to the public. Okay, so that's all the big theory behind it. But out here in the real world, government takes on all sorts of different forms. And probably the easiest way to sorting them out is to just ask one simple question: who's in charge? Who rules? And the answer to that question pretty much always falls into one of three buckets. Power can be held by just one person, a small select group, or by the people as a whole. Let's break each of those down. First up, rule by one. The classic example here is a monarchy. But you gotta know, not all monarchies are the same. In an absolute monarchy, the king or queen has total unrestricted power. But then you have a constitutional monarchy, like in the UK, where the monarch is more of a symbolic figurehead, and the real power is limited by a constitution. Another form of rule by one is a dictatorship, or an autocracy. In this case, a single leader also has absolute power. The key difference, though, is that this power isn't usually inherited. It's often taken and held by force, with basically no rulebook or constitution to limit what they can do. Okay, next up is rule by a few, which is called an oligarchy. In this system, it's not one person, but a small elite group that's calling the shots. And what makes them elite can vary. If it's based on wealth, that's a plutocracy. If it's military leaders in charge, that's a junta. And if it's religious authorities, we call that a theocracy. And that brings us to our last bucket: rule by the many, or democracy. Now, the purest version is a direct democracy, kind of like in ancient Athens, where citizens literally voted on every single law. You can probably imagine that's almost impossible to do with millions of people. That's why most modern democracies are representative, where we, the citizens, elect officials to go and make those decisions on our behalf. So we've looked at the blueprints, the different models of government, but let's get practical. How does this stuff actually work day to day? What do governments do? You can think of it like a giant, complex machine. It's got different parts: the institutions, like a legislature that writes the laws, and courts that interpret them. It runs on specific processes, like making a budget. And it's operated by all the political actors, the elected officials, political parties, and even citizen groups, all trying to steer that machine. So in theory, it's this well-oiled machine. But we all know the reality can be a whole lot messier, right? So what is it that throws a wrench in the gears? Well, the list of potential problems is pretty long. You've got corruption, which can drain public money that's meant for things like schools and hospitals. Deep inequality can put a huge strain on the fabric of society. Political instability makes it impossible to plan for the future. And sometimes the government's own institutions are just too weak to get anything done. Or frankly, citizens just don't feel connected enough to even participate. All of this leads us to one last, really critical question. With all these different types of government and all these challenges they face, how can we tell if one is actually doing a good job? I mean, what does success even look like? Well, a lot of experts use a kind of scorecard with a few key indicators to measure performance. And it goes way beyond just holding an election. It's about things like participation. Do people have a real voice? Transparency. Can we see what the government is doing? And accountability. Can leaders be held responsible for their actions? All these pieces have to work together. And that brings us to the most crucial point of all. When you look at everything we've talked about, it becomes really clear that good governance isn't just about who holds power, whether it's one person, a few people, or everyone. The real test is how they rule and how well they serve the people, protect their rights, and build a society that's fair and stable for everyone. So I'll leave you with a final question to think about. When you look at all those principles of good governance, things like accountability, transparency, participation, equity, which one of those do you think is the most important, the most essential for building a better society? It's definitely something worth pondering. Thanks for tuning in.